Kuliah of Education, and fellow classmates, we would like to first and foremost thank you all for your participation. We are looking forward to a great session with all of you tonight. Before we proceed with the remaining agenda, allow me to introduce our guest of honor, starting from the backbone of this webinar, our beloved Dr. Faiza, our respected speakers, Dr. Hazika, Ms. Zarina, and Ms. Naziha. In a moment, they will be covering topics such as significance on teaching English literature, what are the differences and challenges, as well as how to teach English literature to Gen Z in the local context. So hold on to your seat and stay tuned. Okay, I would also like to remind everyone to keep your microphone off and wait till the end of the session for any Q's and A's. Again, we thank you for your cooperation on this matter. From here, we will allocate a minute for everyone to recite the opening prayer on their own and settle down. Bismillah. All right. Teaching English literature to Gen Z, is it mission impossible? These thoughts must be keeping you at the edge of your seat. So without further ado, let's figure it out. All right, let us begin. NJ, are you there?
Hey, Myra, I'm here.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And let me introduce myself. I am NJ. I'll be moderating tonight's seminar on teaching English literature to Gen Z. Is it mission impossible? Before we start, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to briefly explain why we organized this seminar, specifically on teaching literature. We are aware, due to the aftermath of pandemic, English literature teaching and learning has to take a back seat. But we believe that this shift is temporary due to reduce the literacy gap among students. And by no means, this situation implies that English literature is no longer significant to the curriculum. That's why, as the organizer of this seminar, we collectively believe that it is important to highlight on the discussion around teaching and learning English literature. Should it be continued? It should be continued in anticipation that one day the knowledge will come in handy for the practicing and future teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty sure you guys are all pumped to get this seminar started. So without further ado, allow me to invite our respected Dr. Faiza to give her opening words. Madam?
Thank you very much, NJ. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good evening, everybody. All smiles there. And Amira Alia, thank you very much for being the director for this project. And this is a new course, and I hope that when we organize this seminar, it will not only benefit those who are taking this course, but as well those who are participating, who are the audience today. And of course, I would like to thank all the three speakers, Dr. Hazika Zulaika Aris. Hi, Assalamualaikum, Dr.
Waalaikumsalam.
So Dr. Hazika was my student when she did her undergrad TASO in Kuliah of Education. So well done. You are here as a doctor now. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Now, welcome, Dr. Cikgu Zarina Abdul Malik. Are you here, Cikgu?
Yes,
Cikgu
I'm
Zarina?
here. Yes, I'm here.
All right. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk.
No problem.
Yeah, teaching literature. I would not say Gen Z because I don't follow the American. Teaching literature to Gen Z. That's how I say it. All right. Okay. So welcome, Cikgu Zarina. And also, I would like to welcome back my former student, Cikgu Nurun Naziha Muhammad Azani. Cikgu Ziha, are you there?
Hi, Madam Faiza.
Hi, as sweet, as beautiful as ever, lah Cikgu Zihani. Okay, thank you for agreeing to become the speaker. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you very much.
All the hard work that has been put forward, put through by 7323, as well as, you know, they have their juniors also supporting them tonight. And of course, with not only participating, but there will be tasks for them. So alhamdulillah, I don't want to talk too much because this is your stage, all right? So thank you very much for being here today. And hopefully one day we will bring back our speakers to talk about different topics, inshallah. So with that, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, and have a very fruitful discussion. All right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faiza, for that sweet, short, and simple introduction. Right. Everyone, I'm pretty sure we're all ready, right? Are you guys okay? Shall we start? Okay, great. All right, everyone, I am very pleased to introduce to you the speakers for tonight. And a little bit, I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about their background. Together with us, we have 3 experienced speakers in TESOL background. So the first speaker is Dr. Hazika Zulaika Aris, and she was a TESOL student from IIUM, and after her graduation, she did her PhD in Southampton in the field of applied linguistics. Then she came back and starts teaching in IIUM. She's also a TESOL coordinator as well as the advisor of TES. Give a round of applause to her. I mean, like, although we cannot unmute ourselves, right? But yeah. And the second speaker for today would be Madam Zarina Abdul Malik, and she is an English language teacher. She graduated from University of Auckland, New Zealand, in Bachelor of Education TESOL. Now she is a teacher at MRSM Tone Dr. Ismail with 10 years of teaching experience. Wow, that's a lot of experience that I could not comprehend. Right. Give a round of applause again for the second speaker. Moving on, we have the third speaker, Madam Nurun Naziha Muhammad Azani. She is also a TESOL graduate from IIUM. She graduated from COED, Kuliah of Education. She has been teaching since 2017, and in 2020, she began her journey as an English teacher at SMK Sri Selayang. Thank you so much, speakers, for spending time with us today and wanting to be part of our seminar today, right? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that our speakers for tonight are all experienced speakers when it comes to teaching English. So without further ado, I don't want to take much of your time. Brothers and sisters, let me remind you again before we start our seminar, if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat box. We will be gathering all the questions for the speakers to answer later on during the Q&A session. I hope the speakers are ready to start. Let us begin with the first speaker, Dr. Hazika Zulaika Aris. She will be highlighting on the significance of teaching English literature, and she will be focusing on 6 main subtopics. The first one, she'll be talking about what is teaching English literature, and then why is it important, and what are the consequences if we ignore the teaching English literature, and as well as the significance of English literature within and beyond classroom. So what are the role of English literature in second language classroom? So practicing teachers or new teachers, you guys should be listening to this part closely, right? And finally, and the other 2 is how do we incorporate literature to improve the teaching and learning of English, and what are the biggest misconceptions about teaching English literature, and how do we minimize them? With that, Dr. Hazika, the floor is yours. I would like to invite you to present your topic. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. NJ, is it? Nurul Jannah? Wow, fancy. So thank you so much, NJ. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning I bid to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Faiza, for the invitation. So she's my mentor. Even until now, I cannot call her doctor, or I always call her madam. I don't know why, but it just can't. She's always a teacher to me, So thank you so much, madam. Not to forget to our 2 lovely speakers, Madam Zarina Malik from MRSM, mashallah, 10 years of teaching experience. I rasa kerdil kat sini. And also Sister Nurun Naziha from SMK Selayang, mashallah. Nice meeting all of you and all the best for your session, for the upcoming session, inshallah. All right, I also would like to welcome all my students, perhaps colleagues from Kudav Education, families, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Inshallah, tonight I'll be talking about like what has been said by Miss MC, 6 topics, inshallah. So basically, what is teaching literature all about? Why is it important? What's the role of literature in the second language classroom? How do we incorporate literature in English language classroom? What are the misconceptions and how do we minimize them? And finally, what will happen if we are to remove or the teaching of literature from the ELT classroom? So without further ado, let's start, inshallah, with the first topic. So what is teaching English literature? So to define literature itself, many authors, critics and linguists puzzled over what literature is. They have a debate on what literature is, but to go deeper into the debate, perhaps we can do that next time, inshallah. But basically, in general, according to the dictionary, literature is defined as stories, poems and plays, especially those that are considered to have value as art and not just entertainment. These literary texts, such as stories, poems, plays, novel, or even song lyrics, so they can be studied inside and outside of the English language teaching classroom. So either in their original forms or in their simplified version or abridged versions. Now, the teaching of English literature as a subject or a part of the English language teaching curriculum, on the other hand, refers to the use of literature, the literary text mentioned earlier, as a technique for teaching both the basic language skills, which are the reading, writing, listening, and speaking, as well as the language areas, which are the vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. The teaching of English literature is very popular within the field of second language, as well as the foreign language learning and teaching and learning. Why? I believe because there's a close relationship between language and literature. Some scholars even and linguists even identified literature as an ally of a language. So some recognize literature as a forceful resource in the way of learning language. Some stated that the use of literature in language teaching is a valuable and interesting strategy, while some others even further elaborate that literature is more interesting medium than the traditional methods in teaching a language. So well, some of the things that also that I can summarize based on my research. So when we talk about teaching English literature, it is a learning strategy. So it provides opportunities for multi-sensorial classroom experiences, okay, which might appeal to not only certain learners, but learners with different learning styles. So especially if we incorporate activities such as role play, poem recital, singing, and so on and so forth. So we get learners to use their sensories to learn, and this is appealing to the different types of learners that we have in a classroom. Teaching English literature is also a learning resource that offer rich source of linguistic input. So they allow learners to practice the 4 skills mentioned just now, the speaking, listening, reading, and writing, in addition to demonstrating grammatical structures and presenting new vocabulary, of course. So it's a learning resource, a very rich learning resource for learners. And finally, it is a medium for learners to develop understanding of other cultures. So not only cultures, but also awareness of difference, okay, and to develop tolerance and understanding. So it when they read different literary texts, or perhaps of the target language, perhaps, so it's a safe space where they can get involved and they can engage with their emotions, they can use their imaginations, they can enhance their empathy for others, and perhaps lead them to develop their own creativity and imagination. So to me, that's what teaching English literature is all about. Now, why is it important? So why do we need to focus on why do we even need to have this webinar? So some of the good reason for using literature in the classroom is because firstly, it's literature is authentic material. So it's good to expose learners to the unmodified language source. I mean, like they can in the class, because the skills when they acquire, when they deal with difficult and unknown language, so they can use that outside of the classroom. And then when we teach literature, it also encourage interaction. So, well, I've said earlier, so literary texts, they are often rich and have multiple layers of meaning. So you can have, which can effectively mind for discussion. And we can share feelings, we can share opinions, we can dissect the literary text from different angles. So these activities encourage interactions, thus it might facilitate the enhancement and development of course, the students' language skills. Apart from that, literature also, so it is important for us to teach literature because it expands language awareness. So when we ask learners to examine the sophisticated or non-standard example of language, which normally occur in literary texts, it makes them aware of the norms of the language. So how it is used for different purposes and in different contexts. Okay, so it expands them to language awareness, not only what they've seen in the textbooks, the sanitized language in the textbooks. So when we expose learners with literary text, unconsciously we are expanding the language, the awareness of the target language. And then literature also educate the whole person. So remember, remember, I mean, like I said earlier, so when we dissect literature, we not most of the time, one of the things that we dissect is the values in literary text, right? So when we examine, by examining these values in the literary text, which are mostly related to the values outside of the classroom or outside of or not, I mean, or not within the classroom walls, so teachers, we can encourage them to develop perhaps positive attitude towards this value. So they are aware of the possible values that they might not encounter in the textbooks. Okay, so that's why it is important for us to incorporate literature as part of the teaching curriculum, as part of the subject or aspect of the English language teaching curriculum. Right, and then then moving on to the role of English literature in second language classroom. Well, literature has been a subject of study at different levels of education, not only in Malaysia but also in many countries. So we know for a certain that it has a major role and of course very important too, or else these countries won't incorporate the teaching of literature in their classes. So, and I encountered there's even a chronological history about the role of literature within classroom, as well as its importance. So, but again, we're not going to go deeper into that today. So, but in general, the idea is that literature has been given much emphasis, especially in the ESL and in the EFL English second language, and in the EFL English foreign language classroom. So we know that literature plays an important role in the teaching of language. Okay, so there are critics object to the use of literature in language learning, and that's why we have this policy or sorry. Okay. Okay. Okay, so there are there are some people, I mean, critics object to the use of literature in the classroom. And that's why we have this webinar today to look at, is it okay for us to remove or to ignore the teaching of literature in the classroom? Even though we have these critics that object to the use of literature, like a group of scholars that critiques the use of literature in language learning, but most scholars and researchers have also responded to that logically, and explained or highlight the importance of literature in language learning. Some of the points that I can gather for you guys tonight. So according to these scholars, apart from what I've said earlier, it gives literature gives students exposure to meaningful context, full of descriptive language that you won't get in textbook, and as well as interesting characters that can facilitate creativity, that can facilitate imagination. Apart from that, they also said that it is important for us to have, to have literature, because the literature introduces intense range of vocabulary, dialogues, and prose that like I said, that prepare the learners to communicate the language. Like when they see the use of the language in the normal context, in the various different contexts, it helps them to use those new words, to use those new phrases that they learn from the literary text into the real world, or into the real world, right? And then finally, according to these scholars, so literature can also make learners more conscious. They make them more reflective. So as we will dissect, or as we analyze the literary text, they become reflective and also creative, which thereby speed up their language learning process. It facilitates their response, it gives them a language access. So this helps to with the learning of the language, learning of the target language, right? So that's how important literature in the teaching and learning of the language, and those are also the roles that they play as a part of the English language teaching curriculum. Now, how do we indirectly incorporate literature to improve English second language learning? Well, I'm gonna touch this on the general, on the surface of the idea of the topic, on the surface, because I believe our third speakers gonna elaborate more, gonna tell you more in detail and in the context of a secondary school teachers on how you guys can incorporate literature as part of your lesson, of your teaching and your instructional practices in school. So I'm going to explain to you the three models that are quite popular. So according to scholars, there are three different models, or three or more. But for tonight, I'm going to highlight only three. So they are different models, okay, suggested on the teaching of literature to English second language and English foreign language learners. But how the teacher basically the different approaches that the teacher use, the materials or the literary text depends on this model that they choose. Okay, so we have first the cultural model. So the cultural model views literary text as a product. So this means that the literary text is treated as a source of information about the target culture. Okay, excuse me. It's the most traditional approach and often used in university courses on literature. But You can also use this in school. It is the approach tends to be teacher centered. Okay, as basically learners get acquainted with the different cultural and artistic heritage of the target language through the literary text presented to them. Where these model examine not only the social bit of the target culture, but also the political, the historical background to the text introduced, as well as to the target culture. The main point is that there's no specific language work done on the text. So, well, it is a cultural model, so it focuses more on the culture of the target language. Okay. Next, the next model is the language model. So these models, it's more learner-centered compared to the cultural model. This model is a more learner-centered model. So learners proceed with a text. So in this model, learners pay attention to the way language is used in the text. So they not only they try to understand the meaning, but it also increase their general awareness of the language, of the target language. So usually teachers will focus on perhaps the general grammar or the vocabulary, or even the some teachers, teachers can also use the stylistic analysis. So basically, it involves the linguistic features of the text, okay, in making meaningful interpretations of the text. And finally, we have the personal growth model. So this is also a more learner-centered approach. It encourages learners to draw on their opinions. So to reflect on their own emotions, feelings, and also personal experiences. So the interaction is aimed between the text and the reader to help them make this language learning more memorable. So as they reflect on their own emotion about the text, their own feelings, evoked feelings, and share their personal experiences relating that to the text, it is more memorable. It is more relatable to them. Okay, and these model, so the personal growth model, basically founded on the students' engagement with the literary text. So yes, it is a more learner centered. It's based on their this is where students develop the interpretive skills as they learn literature or as they analyze the literary text. And then moving on, so so far we've talked about what literature is all about, how is it important, why is it important, what's the role of literature in teaching English, language, and also how, what are the models available to incorporate the teaching of literature in the classroom. Now, it is common to have misconception or misperceptions about teaching literature, and based on my research, okay, some of the misconceptions or the common misperceptions that teachers have when they okay, it's Azan, so I think let's stop for a while. All right, let's continue, inshallah. Okay, so we stopped at the biggest misconception on teaching literature. So there are many reasons why teachers don't feel comfortable with literature in their language classroom, and one of the famous phrase is that teachers think that you need to be an expert. So basically, they think that they are not competent enough to teach literature. They don't take literature in perhaps during their studies. They might don't they have there's also possibility that they don't read book themselves, so they are not aware or exposed to the literary text available, or even they have no pleasure from reading them, so they don't see why they should teach. And this influence, or this then adds to this idea that I'm not an expert, I'm not interested, so I don't think that teaching is literature is easy. So no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to avoid that. Okay, so that's one. The other bit is that most teachers, they think that you can't incorporate any types of a literary text. So it should be proper literature. It should be, perhaps the canonical or the classic text, the Western text. It should be, well, having that in mind, they then, because they don't have these perhaps motivation or interest, they weren't exposed with these many resources or literary texts available. So this adds to their misconceptions about literature. They think that it's hard to find it's hard to find the proper literary text. So well, then literature should be proper, must be proper. So no, I'm not gonna teach that. Okay, and finally, no, not finally, before the final one, teachers always think that perhaps what the literary text that they are going to introduce, okay, is perhaps might be too hard for the students. They don't know how, not they don't know, perhaps they think that sometimes, even though they're passionate about the literary text, but perhaps they might think that the piece of literary text is too advanced for their students' language. So well, there's a lot of things that you can do there. You can you can try and error, but they have this mentality that most literary text, especially the long text, is going to be too hard for the students, and they don't see the purpose on using that or incorporating that literature in the classroom. Okay, and finally, the biggest cause of excluding literature from the language classroom, and I believe this is very relatable to the Malaysian context, is there's not enough time. We don't have enough time. We have lots to cover in the textbook, in the syllabus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't even know how to count. Well, we don't have enough time. So why do we need to teach literature? So we don't have time for such dallying. So we shouldn't, literature is like, nah, you don't have to teach that. Okay, again, these are the misconceptions that teachers might have. They should be more than this, but these are some of the misconceptions that I can highlight for tonight. Well, if you, or I mean, if us, or if the teachers falls into these categories, or misunderstood what literature in the language teaching classroom can be, perhaps the key point to minimize this misconception is to shift our mentality to think that actually literature is can be a flexible tool for any language teachers. I believe that teaching literatures require certain training, but not specialist training. I mean, like every teachers who are equipped with the teacher education program has the ability or competent enough to teach literature. The literary text incorporated can be brief. It can be brief, not necessarily has to be from the West. It can be contemporary, as long as it is relevant to your students. The main point is to make sure that the literary text that you bring into the classroom is relatable to your students, fit the purpose of your language class, or is fun and interesting for your two students to engage. All right, and teaching literature, it's not only about teaching the literary text per se. It is also to aid students speaking. It's also to aid the reading skills of the students. So you can think that the literary text is kind of helping to enhance the competency of your students. So by engaging them with discussion, role plays, when they do group works, when they analyze the literary text, and they talk about it. So those are the activities that can help the student to improve their speaking and reading skills, perhaps. And then it can also encourage critical thinking. You know, that I well, not entirely sure, but I think you can get students to think more critically with the literary text and the textbooks. Okay, it opens, and the literary texts have this opportunity to open open the student's mind onto different perspectives of the world. Okay, and well, in general, it's a tool. It's kind of it's a flexible tool. It's an ideal tool that that teachers can use for for revision purposes. Well, having said that, so yes, it is flexible. Yes, it is ideal. Yes, it can be. It doesn't require specialist training. Yes, it can be brief. It can be, you know, as long as it is relevant. But of course, you need to have a degree of preparation. So you don't just simply give the students a literary text and you ask them to analyze. No, you should incorporate some other activities to accompany the literary text, the analysis of the literary text. I believe our third speaker or even our second speaker will talk more about this. And then and you also need to think that the most important bit of teaching literature is to make sure that whatever you bring into the classroom, the texts that you bring into the classroom, are relevant, are relatable, and are not or suitable for their level of fluency. Okay, and then if you say that like I mentioned earlier, some of the teachers might not have enough exposure of literature or of learning literature, of using literary text or reading literary text. That is an excuse. Why? Because nowadays there is a growing body of support out there for classroom resources. You know, you have the help of experienced teachers. You just need to Google. You just need to Google. You have even copyright-free short stories. You have copyright-free poetry. You can even contact the authors and the poets and ask, if you have their email, of course, to ask for permission. So it is easy. It's easier nowadays to find literary texts or literary sources online. So even though you are not exposed, even though you don't have enough exposure or you don't read literary texts, but it is possible for you to teach literature, and it is possible for you to find relevant or suitable literary texts for your students. Okay, so that's on the misconception and how we can minimize them. And finally, what are the consequences or what are the impacts if we ignore or if we remove the teaching of literature, of the English literature? So I believe this is the highlight of our webinar tonight. So what will happen if we remove or divorce the teaching of literature in the ELT classroom or ELT English language teacher teaching curriculum? If this is my class, I'm going to ask for opinions from each one of you, but this is not, so that's fine. But okay, so before I go to the main points, it is important for the audience to know that in Malaysia, the English language learning and teaching in Malaysia incorporated language literature as an aspect of the English language teaching curriculum. But now there's a debate to remove it from the curriculum, and most teachers. 1 minute, doctor. One more. Okay, sorry. All right. Okay. and wait. I ilang point I. And most teachers they don't teach literature anymore. So well, in my opinion, if we are to omit literature from our curriculum, we might have created a gap between the linguistic structure and the actual usage of the language. So the divorce might undermine the efforts of teaching and learning of language, because as we removed literature from the curriculum, then perhaps the dominance and our dominance and our concentration might shift to the functional use of the language. It's not entirely bad, but somehow it's to me, I believe this might raise issues and concerns for effective teaching and learning of the language, of the English language. You are taking the fun. You can have fun, of course, but you are taking the fun out of the learning and the teaching and learning of language. Apart from that, the role of literature is the role of the literature in the teaching and learning of English is significant, as I mentioned earlier. And if we are going to ignore and remove it from curriculum, we might lose these benefits, like the opportunities to facilitate intelligence and sensibility training, like I said just now, to develop their reading skills, their strategies, their fluency, their proficiency. And also we might miss the opportunities to stimulate their creativity and imagination. It is not possible. I mean, it's a good platform. It's a good opportunity to do this with the teaching of literature, and also there's a possibility of limiting their cultural awareness. So this is one of the important role of literature, and student learn about the student are more aware of the culture of other people, not only the target language, through the teaching and learning of literature. It can be done, with other part or other aspects of teaching and learning a language, but I believe that the major portion of learning culturally to expose cultural awareness to students is through literature. And finally, so removing the teaching of literature in English language teaching might impede the psycholinguistic aspects of language learning. So basically we are this is with regards to their vocabulary expansion. This is with regards to their reading skills, and also perhaps, basically those the grammatical and the vocabulary bit of learning a language through literature. So I think that is that's it for me. I'm so sorry I'm taking more time or a lot of time. So back to you, NJ, inshallah.
All right. It's okay, Dr. Hazika. I feel the enthusiasm from you and the excitement. You're very excited to share the information with our teachers and our participants, like future teachers here. And Dr. Hazika, thank you so much. That was very informative. And I like it when you said that why is it important to teach literature? Let me just highlight one point that I think it's very relevant, because we want to expose learners to the unmodified literature source, and it will help them be more reflective and conscious. So I think it is very interesting when you use literature, it will lead your students to be more conscious and reflective and critical as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Hazika, for that informative session that you've explained to us just now. And you've highlighted the 3 models. Amazing. I love that part. All right. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll proceed with our second speaker. And before we proceed with our second speaker, let me just remind all of you to be ready with your questions. You can type it in the chat box, all right? And at the same time, you can also pin the second speaker so that you can have a better view when she speaks. So you can feel the enthusiasm from her part, right? Okay, so the second speaker for today is Madam Zarina Abdul Malik, and she'll be highlighting on the differences and challenges in teaching literature to Gen Z. So what are the challenges when it comes to teaching literature to Gen Z? Is it just the challenges of using technology, or are there more challenges towards incorporating literature to them, right? With that, Madam Zarina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much thank you very much to the MC for today, and I also want to say thank you very much to Master of Education Council students from ED Lead 7323. I hope I got that right. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to your webinar today. I'm very honored to be part of your webinar today. All right, so what I will be sharing with you is differences and challenges in teaching English literature to Gen Z. Okay, so my name is Zarina, and I am an English teacher from MRSM to Dr. Ismail. So if you don't know where that is in Pontian, Johor. Okay, so as was shared earlier, my teaching experience is 10 years. For you, that's a lot. For you, that's a lot, but for me, is 10 years is still a lot to learn, if you ask me. Okay. All right. So what I'm sharing today is my experience, not only as a teacher teaching literature, but also as a student who learned literature before. So my points here are taken from both sides, from my experience learning literature and from my experience teaching literature to students. Okay. Right. So can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. All right, so I will be covering a few things in my session tonight. Right? I'll be talking about who Gen Zs are, what are their characteristics and their traits, and then I will be sharing with you how Gen Z learns their characteristics basically when it comes to learning, what are their characteristics. And then based on this, how do we as teachers make teaching English literature relevant and interesting to Gen Z? And then I'll be talking about challenges in teaching English literature in Malaysian context. And based on that, based on those challenges, how do we make English literature more significant? All right. Okay. So can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, so what I have here is a table of, the different generations that we have in the world population today. So I hope you can see that. Okay, so I hope you can see the table. Right, so right now we have 5 different generations. So we have the maturies, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. Okay, all right, so before I start explaining any further, can I basically get a view of who my audience is? So can you just type which generation you belong to based on this table? Can you just type in the chat box which generation you belong to, just so that I can get a sense of who my audience is? Okay, so can you just type which generation you belong to? Oh my god. Okay lah, right. So it's very obvious that most of you are Gen Z. Okay, we have one Gen Y. Thank you. Okay, got gang. All right. Okay, so yeah, so it's very obvious that I'm teaching a group of Gen Z people. So I hope that my point is right. Okay, my point is right. So we have a few Gen Y and Gen Z as well. So I'm obviously not from Gen Z. I'm from Gen Y. I'm from Gen Y. Okay, so we have a few Gen Y. Yeah, the gang. Okay, so basically, I won't be discussing about other generations, but I will be focusing on Gen Z. Okay, all right. So when we talk about Gen Z, okay, their formative experience. So what I mean by formative experience is basically big events that happen in their life or issues that's been talked about for Gen Z. One of it that's very obvious is global warming. Okay, so over the years, I think for the past 20 years, a lot of people have been talking about raising issues about global warming, and we have people like Greta Thunberg leading that movement. Okay, so yeah, that is a reflection of the Gen Z. Okay, they are more concerned about global warming, and these are voiced out now. So this is very obvious. This is very obvious that obvious happenings in Gen Z. Okay, that's what they are concerned, and also. Another formative experience is mobile devices. Okay, that is pretty much evident in their lives. Okay, right? So most of Gen Z would grow up having mobile devices. If it's not tablets, it's smartphones. It's in their everyday lives basically. And then there are also the generation that is capable of producing their own media, so they don't need to have like accreditation or credibility to produce their own media. They can do that. Anyone can basically produce anything as long as they have the right tools with them. So that is a formative experience of Gen Z. So they have these experiences um, in their lifetime. Okay, and if you look at the percentage of global population, okay, so Gen Z represents 32% of the world population today. So world population today is dominated by Gen Z. So these are the group of people that I think we need to pay attention to because, excuse me, they are the ones who are probably leaders today. Okay, they're probably the leaders today and the leaders that we want to shape in the future. Okay, so when it comes to aspiration, they're the ones who are more concerned about security and stability. And for the past 2 years, we have seen this with the pandemic. Okay, so a lot of people are more concerned about security and stability, and not just in terms of job security or stability. It's about how to sustain their livelihood as well. So they're more concerned about that security and stability. Uh, how do they how do they sustain their living? Okay, so basically that's that. So when it comes to attitude towards technology, it's very obvious they're technoholics. Okay, so they're entirely dependent on IT. So like I said, they grow up having internet and devices around them, and these things are becoming easily accessible and affordable to them. So they are basically technoholics. They're entirely dependent on them because these technology are becoming more accessible and more uh, accessible to them. Okay, right. Okay, so when it comes to attitude towards career, they are basically career multitaskers. So that means that they can move from one job to another seamlessly. Okay, for example, they can have a job, but they can also have a side hustle. Like in my case, like I can be an English teacher, but my side hustle is probably proofreading. Okay, so I think a lot of Gen Z have that capability when it comes to jobs. I mean, they're not focused on one job only, but they can do other jobs as well, and they do that sometimes as a side hustle. Okay. When it comes to communication media, they're the ones who communicate using handheld devices. So I think it's things like smartphones and tablets. Okay, they communicate that way, as compared to other technology. As compared to other generations. You know, like if you're the maturest, they write a lot. They write letters. So that's because that's just how they communicate. And then if you're baby boomer, they rely on telephones to communicate. If you're a Gen X, you communicate using emails or text messages. If you're Gen Y, we text or use social media. But for Gen Z basically they communicate using handheld devices, and this has been made easier through the invention of smartphone. Okay. When it comes to communication preference, they prefer to communicate through apps like FaceTime because I think they like to. I think technology, smartphones or tablets, has made this more convenient for them to communicate. I mean, they don't have to go. They don't have to go somewhere to meet someone. They can just communicate with their friends. And with technological advancements, you can just FaceTime, and you can feel that your friend is right in front of you. And I think for Gen Z, they are more comfortable communicating that way. All right. When it comes to technological milestone, um, one of their very obvious technological milestone is the invention of augmented reality or reality, and you can see this a lot lately. Okay. All right. So that's basically the characteristics and traits of Gen Z. Okay. So keeping this in mind, we have to sort of tackle how we can draw the Gen Zs to learn literature. Okay, all right. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so based on these characteristics and traits, so how do we learn? So how do we teach the Gen Zs? Okay, all right. So first thing that we need to understand is this. Okay, so Gen Z are basically tech savvy individuals because they are born at a time where technology is accessible and affordable to them. It's everywhere, people use it a lot. okay, people use it a lot in their everyday life. Okay, so they're basically very tech savvy because of the situation at that time. Okay, I'm sorry, hang on, let me. Okay, so that is also pretty much integral in their lives. Okay, so that is basically technology is basically integral in their lives. Okay, and they're also highly dependent on technology. So they must have at least smartphone for them to survive, because if they don't have technology, they just don't know what to do. Okay, so if you put a Gen Z in a jungle, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so I don't know. So they'll feel more at ease if they have technology with them. If you put a Gen Z in the jungle with a smartphone, they can survive. I mean, they're happy. I mean, and they're happy. Okay, so basically, Gen Z people, they're tech savvy people, and they instinctively know how to use technology. So this group of students, um, they need minimal guidance when it comes to technology. They just know what to do. I mean, as teachers, I see this a lot. I see this a lot in the past few years. Sometimes they will be the one teaching me how to use this, or they will be the one who's telling me what apps to use and so on. And we don't have to teach all this to them. They just know what to do, or they just know where to find it. They just know. Okay? All right, so that's the first point. They are tech savvy. Because they grew up around technology, especially if they are born after the invention of smartphones, they are visual learners. Okay, so they're obviously visual learners. They need to have images or sounds when it comes to learning, and that stimulates their mind, and they absorb information much faster if you have any visual or any sounds, because of the environment that they grew up. Okay, so if they grew up at a time where YouTube was highly popular, most likely they would learn effectively that way. So as teachers, we always need to think about having at least a picture, or at least a sound when we teach, because we know that when we have this in class, they would learn. Okay, so they would wake up in class and they would be easily stimulated. Okay, oh, it needs more. Okay, all right. So they're obviously visual learners. Okay, and they're definitely not pen and paper generation. So if you give them pen and paper and ask them to write for 1 hour, they would definitely switch off within 5 minutes. So they need visual stimulation. Okay, and because of this, they have shorter attention span. Okay, so yeah, so they get easily bored if you spend at least 10 minutes just talking and talking and talking, or just getting them to read and read for 10 minutes. They would get bored. Okay, so, and I think this is because um, they grew up at a time where they have options. Okay, so if they're bored, they know what they can do something else while doing something else. Like for example, if nothing is exciting, they can just switch to something else. Okay, like for example, if the TV show that you're watching is quite boring, you can always look at the phone and look what's interesting in your social media. Okay, so that's a sign that they have a short attention span. They're easily bored. If nothing is exciting in front of them, they would switch off and turn to something else. So I think that is one of the challenges of teaching Gen Z. Okay, because they have short attention span. Okay, all right. So I'm only highlighting three characteristics of Gen Z learners. Okay, so they are tech savvy, they are visual learners, but most of them would have short attention span. Okay, all right. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so based on these traits, how do we make teaching literature more relevant and interesting to Gen Z? Okay, so I think if we choose the right text, it would make a difference to the learners. Okay, I think this is an issue that's been talked for one generation to another, and I think one generation to another. During my time, we think that learning this text is important because this is reflective of their time and so on. Okay, I think every generation would pick would find certain texts more relatable and suitable to them. Okay, right. For example, I remember when I first started teaching. Okay, so one of the literature texts that they feel students should read is The Railway Children, because it highlights family values and all that. Because I think most teachers feel that family values is something that's lacking today in today's generation and so on. But when we talk, but then now that I think again as a teacher, maybe teaching railway children is not suitable anymore, because I think the values of a Gen Z are different now. So I think when it comes to choosing the right text, we always have to change the text according to the aspirations and values of that generation. Okay, like for example, I think if you were to teach texts like Ready Player One, if you have heard of that story, Ready Player One, I think that is a reflection of Gen Z today, because that story is dealing about games, okay, and multiculturalism and so on, and if you choose text that is relevant to them and suits their aspirations and morals, that would draw their attention to literature. Okay, all right. So another way to make teaching and learning literature interesting is by incorporating social media. Okay, so I think we cannot deny the power. We cannot deny the power and influence social media has on us human beings from every aspect, and this includes education as well. So if we incorporate social media into teaching and learning literature, it makes it more relevant. So when I say incorporating social media, I mean things like finding resources there. I think in social media places like Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, I think there's a wealth of material that you can find there, and I won't be surprised that you can find things related to literature there as well. So if you can, if we can use that as a resource for our students, that would draw them to learn literature more. Okay, so that's what I think. We can incorporate social media as well to make it interesting and relevant to Gen Z. Okay, so in my previous slide, I mentioned about how Gen Z, how Gen Z have short attention span. Okay, and I think one way to make it more interesting and relevant to Gen Z is focusing on quotable or memorable lines from a text. Because they have short attention span, they feel like they don't have time to read something that's very long and wordy, something that would take days for them to study and understand. They like something that's short but memorable. And I see this a lot in today's generation. Sometimes when you look at their social media, not to say that I'm stalking their social media, yeah, but sometimes I see what they post, okay, unintentionally. So they like to post quotes. They like quotes. Okay, students, they like quotes. Any quotes that they can find on the internet. And they would post it whenever that they feel that this quote validates whatever that they are going through. And I think if we can do that, if we can take lines from text literature and build a discussion based on that, that would make it more appealing to them. Okay, like for example, when I was studying literature, okay, so one of the literature that we had to learn was The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Robert Frost. So if you learn literature in early 2000, you would know this poem, The Road Not Taken, and I can still remember a few lines from that poem. Okay, like I'm taking the last three lines from the last stanza. Okay, so two roads diverge in a wood, and I to the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I remember reading that poem when I was in school, and that is still stuck in me until today, because I know that is what I am going through. It might not mean much to me when I was in school, or maybe a little bit when I was studying. It's like, oh, okay, this is very deep, very interesting. But the impact of that last three lines is lasting to me, because that is still, I think as we grow older, sometimes we have to make decisions in life, and we have to make choices and so on. But those 3 lines really got me until today. Okay, so if we can focus that, if we can tap into that, I think the younger generations would find literature relevant and interesting. Okay, all right, so yeah, so I think those are the 3 ways that we can make literature interesting and relevant to Gen Z. Okay, all right, so can we move on to the next slide, please? Sorry, I'm sorry, my talk is probably more than 3 minutes. Okay, I have to apologize. Okay. Okay, so next is challenges in teaching English literature. Okay, so I think the first speaker has mentioned about literature not being taught in schools anymore because it's not in the curriculum anymore. That's right. Okay, so that is one obvious challenge. It's not in the school curriculum anymore. It's beginning 5 years ago. Sorry, the last batch to learn literature is SPM 2020. So starting SPM 2021, there's no more literature. Literature is not tested anymore. So basically, the Form 5 batch is the first batch that has never learned literature. I'm not mistaken. So that is actually the first challenge. It's not relevant anymore in our in basically teaching and learning. Okay, it's not taught anymore. Okay, but I'm going to highlight 3 other challenges as well. Okay, so first of all, we have to admit that reading is not a habit or culture in Malaysia. No matter how much we try to inculcate it in our families, in our culture, it's just not a habit. If you ask any students today, if they say that their hobby is reading, you'll be like, wow, really? You like to read? Because most students today, if you ask them what your hobby is, they would say watching YouTube or playing games.
TikTok.
Then, okay, TikTok and so on. If you heard any student saying, I like to read, it's like, oh, okay, you like to read, yeah, wow, okay. Yeah, so reading is a rarity for students today, unfortunately. And it's sad to say that in Malaysian society, it's not inculcated in inculcated in our habits lah. And you can see this, okay, like if you sit in the MRT, what are the people doing there mostly? They're probably watching phones, kan? But if you go to other countries, they'll be sitting in a train, but they'll be reading, not looking at their phones. So yeah, reading is not really a habit among us. No matter how much we try to inculcate it, no matter how good it is, it's just, I don't know, it's not really a habit lah among our Malaysian society, unfortunately. Okay, so another challenge is uncontextualized text, and this is especially in schools, basically. And I'm referencing texts that we had taught for the previous years. Okay, previous years literature curriculum. Okay, so when I was learning literature, we had at least a local poems or works from local authors, local poets that I can remember. So I remember we had to learn one poem from Asif Ibrahim, if I'm not mistaken. So we still had that. But when I started teaching, all of that changed. So there was completely new literature. So, and they're all very westernized. We're all very westernized. UK poets, American authors, and so on. There's nothing from Malaysia. So this makes it, I think, unrelatable to students because they're learning Western values, they're learning Western settings, foreign settings that they might not be able to relate. I remember for Form 5, the novel that they had to read was Catch Us If You Can. It's very American. Everything about it is very American from the setting, from the language. So it's not easy for our students to relate to that. Okay, so it's that is the challenge. Okay, it's uncontextualized text. And the last one is negative perception on English literature. I mean, just saying the word literature itself is mouthful. Not many of our students can say that. Okay, that's one thing. And then hearing the word literature is already daunting for them. Okay, because they imagine things that are very difficult. Okay, that's just an impression. But when we look deeper into that, okay, so most students would find literature difficult due to a number of factors, due to a few factors. Okay, so number one, probably because they don't have the language proficiency to understand literature. Okay, so they find it difficult. Okay, Also, they might find it a bit difficult because of the complexity of the text or the messages behind it. Okay, they're just they just don't want to think it's like, oh, okay, what is he talking about? They always want an easy way out. They just don't want to think anything behind it. So there's this whole negative perception about literature, about it being difficult, about their probably language proficiency, which is not up to par, or maybe because they just find thick books very daunting to read, or wordy, bombastic words are just too daunting for them. So I think these are the challenges of teaching literature to students. Okay, so reading is not culture, uncontextualized text, and also negative perception on English literature on the whole. Okay, so those are the challenges. Right, so can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so based on these challenges, why do we need these challenges to make literature more significant to the current context? All right, so number one, literature. I think speaker number one has highlighted this. Okay, teaching literature is a reminder. Not only a reminder, but it's a window for us to understand human nature. We learn a lot about being humans from literature. Okay, so we learn about justice, we learn to empathize, we learn about fairness, we learn about inequality from literature. Okay, so I think as human beings, we always need to be reminded about these things, because no matter how technologically advanced we are, we cannot replace human emotions and human connection. Okay, so and literature is a tool for that. We always need to be reminded that this is what makes us human. This is something that's not right, and something that we need to improve as human beings. No machine can improve that except us human beings. But we have to learn. All of this, and literature is a window to that. Okay, so I think that's how we can make literature significant. We always need to literature is a window to understanding human nature, and also literature is an opportunity for language learning. Okay, so speaker number one has highlighted this lengthily in her session. Okay, so hang on. Okay, so when it comes to language learning, okay, so I think that teaching literature allows us as teachers to get the students to learn good vocabulary from the literature, and from the literature there the students can notice structures or forms there. So and through authentic materials. So I think teaching literature allows students to learn language much better. And if you allow the students to explore this, okay, so it would help them to construct the language much better, and in fact improve their language. Okay, it's because they are picking up these new words, forms, and structure in the literature, in poems or in the novels and the stories that they read. Okay, so literature is an opportunity for language learning, and also literature sparks creativity within the students. Okay, I think as human beings, we always want to be inspired by something. Okay, and I think literature is one of those things that could inspire us as human beings, because the messages behind it could be something that is relatable to us, or something that we feel like we want to share to everyone. And because of this, we always have to think of ways of how to share this. And this is where creativity comes. Okay, because we are inspired by something, we want to share this, and because we want to share this, we think of ways of how we can share this. So this is where creativity comes. So I remember when I teach literature, I always ask them to probably produce something out of the text that we learn. So I remember in one of the things that I ask my students to do is to write poems, and I teach them very simple poems, something that's not very daunting, like Robert Frost. No, like acrostic poems or a haiku, just very simple poems, so that they don't feel daunted by the whole notion that they have to write a poem. But when I asked them to write poems, I was just very impressed with the way that they write. It shows that number one, they're actually capable of writing, and number two, I get to see this wonderful ideas that comes from them. Something that I never taught them, but when I read them, it's like, wow, this is something that they've always wanted to say, and because I gave them this structure, this um, structure that that they can use to express themselves, they can do it, and in fact, they can express it so beautifully. Okay, so um, giving the exposing them to literature sparks their creativity, and in fact, if you're an advanced learner, if you're a very skilled person, if your language proficiency is much higher, I think we can come up with something way more impressive. Like for example, you could come up with music or short videos based on literature. Okay, all right. So could we move on to the next slide, please? Sorry, yeah, it's taking more than 1 minute. Yeah. Okay, all right. Um, okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to guess this. Okay, I want you to guess what song this is from. Okay, this is taken from a very popular song. All right, so it goes something like this: that you were Romeo, you were throwing pebbles, and my daddy said, "Stay away from Juliet." Okay, and I was crying on the staircase, begging you, please don't go. And I said, Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone. I'll be waiting. I'll tengok, okay, I tak boleh baca lagi, you dah tahu jawapannya kan? Okay, yes, okay, this is like a part from Taylor Swift's love story song. Okay, and if you can see, there's a literature reference there, okay, from the story Romeo and Juliet, okay, from Romeo and Juliet. And as I mentioned previously, okay, so literature sparks creativity, and we can see how the story of Romeo and Juliet from Shakespeare, okay, can be turned into a song. Okay, so this song is inspired from Romeo and Juliet. So if you want to know, Romeo and Juliet was staged in the year 1597. Okay, so that was 400 years ago. So, and you look at how in 2021 people are still referencing Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I think that's what literature does to you. So that's why I mentioned earlier in my session. Okay, so that we need to take things, memorable lines or memorable quotes, something that's memorable from a text, so that these things will be stuck in students, and they will be inspired based on that. And that all came from literature, right? Okay, so can we move on to the next slide? Maybe you can skip the video. Yeah, maybe you can skip that, right? Okay, so the bottom line is, okay, so literature remains timeless. Okay, so as human beings, like I mentioned earlier, as human beings, we always need to be reminded of things that makes us human. Okay, so if you study literature from the earlier times, maybe from Shakespeare's time, and then you move on to Jane Eyre, and then you move on to things like a streetcar named Desire ke, and then you move on to what is it? Horton Hears a Who, and then you move on to things like Da Vinci Code and so on. All right, so these things are all telling the stories about human beings of that time. Okay, and as human beings, we always like to be reminded. We always want to hear stories from the past, but we also want to be reminded of things that makes us human beings. And literature is a window of that. So, and also, literature is an opportunity for language learning. In fact, it's a very, very good resource for language learning, because from there we can, get good vocabulary. We learn how to construct sentences. We learn about form and structure in a language. So I think literature is a very, very valuable resource when it comes to language learning. But in order to draw Gen Z to learn literature, there has to be changes in methods and approaches to teaching literature. You cannot apply the methods of teaching literature 20 years ago to students today. That will not work. You cannot ask the students to read the poem and then understand the poem just like that. It doesn't work. You have to have we have to understand what works for them and what doesn't work for them when it comes to teaching and learning. So that's where keeping up with generational gap comes in this discussion. Okay, so we need to understand what works for Gen Z and what does not work with Gen Z. Okay, so and because of that, as teachers, if you are a teacher, you always have to think of how to draw your students. You always have to change your methods. Like maybe 10 years ago, it's okay to teach students just to recite the poem and then highlight words and then discuss the meaning. That's it. It might work back then, but today that method does not work. We have to find resources that's relatable to them, like incorporating social media into the discussion, having something in the background, song or anything, just to draw their interest to that. Okay, because at the end of the day, literature is an outlet for expressions, and as human beings, we always want to express whatever that is in our minds. Okay, so so if we can draw our students to literature um, through changes in our methods, I think teaching English literature would continue to remain relevant. Okay, so yeah, so I think with that, that's the end of my session for today. Can we move on to the next slide? I think that's my last slide. Yeah, okay. All right, so that's my session for today. Sorry, it took more than 20 minutes. But I hope you get something. But I hope you get something from my very very short session lah, from my sharing lah. Okay. All right.
Yes,
So
yes.
all right. So
Thank
that's
you
all.
so much. Thank you so much, Madam Zarina. I'm so sorry I have to keep on reminding you on the time, but it's okay. It's okay. We've got all the information needed, and it was very illuminating on the way you share the ways to teach Gen Z, especially highlighted on how we should be focusing on different methods for different generations, as well as how Gen Z sees things now. They are visual learners, they have short attention span, and they're also multitaskers. So as teachers, we have to be aware of which generation that we'll be teaching, and then we should be choosing the best literature to teach them. So I think it was very great. It was very informative, and I love it. And thank you so much for being patient with me as well. And thank you so much for highlighting all the important parts. So I think we are ready to go to our next speaker, which is our final speaker for tonight, speaker number 3. And our final speaker for tonight is Madam Nurun Naziha Muhammad Azani. She'll be highlighting on teaching English literature to Gen Z in local context. So we know in local context now, we're not focusing much on teaching literature, but she'll be highlighting on that. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to our third and final speaker for tonight, Madam Nurun Nazihai.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Madam, I'm so sorry. It's a bit hard to hear you. Maybe is it your speaker?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Much better.
Much better.
The others, I think much better, right?
Yes.
Okay, right, Madam, go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much again, our moderator, Miss Nurul Jannah. Wait, yeah. Okay, I am honored to be here because this is actually my first time. This is my very first time experiencing speaking in a webinar, and I feel so small to be here with our two expertise, our two amazing speakers. Thank you very much to Dr. Hazika as well as Madam Zarina for your sharing. Those are very useful for me as well because I am a novice teacher. So tonight, without further ado, let me talk a bit about myself. I am Naziha Azani. I am an English language teacher, and I am from SMK Sri Selayang, and tonight I'm going to share about the position of English language, English literature in our education system, and some of the ways to tackle Gen Z, and some of suggested activities that teachers can do in classroom, as well as the effects on the use of technology. Again, the current curriculum or education system. So in the past years, we know that teachers were very worried if literature syllabus weren't finished, isn't it? But now it's different because we have the new format for English language. So let's look how important. This is the sample from 2020 SPM format sample. And as you can see, this is actually section D, in which it consists 20 marks. That is a huge number, very huge number. They have the specific section which we have poem, and this is novel. As you can see in the bottom, we have 15 marks for novel, very huge number. That's why in the past years, we have more lessons on literature. We have a lot of practice for the students to drill in order for them to score this part, this section. And even if we go to Google, we can have tremendous sample answers, sample essays on Google, even sample answers for poem, we can have it. Now, however, because we are now shifting to the focus of a new format, this is the new format taken from KPM. This is format instrument PT3 mulai tahun 2019. As you can see, we have 4 papers now. In the past years, we have only 2 papers, reading and writing. Now we have added speaking and listening, in which if you look at the bahagian number 4, there is no specific topics for literature. Even in speaking, kertas 3, we have bahagian 1, bahagian 1, it is interview, and bahagian 2, individual prompt card story, in which it is a storytelling, and number 3, bahagian 3 is discussion task. So it has a bit of literature aspect, but because of these 4 skills, we have compared to the previous years, the importance has made it least important, very least important. That's why teachers now, some of the teachers do not teach literature anymore. They will incorporate literature teaching in among of the skills, 4 skills. So let's see a lesson in scheme of work, because we want to see how important literature now. Where is the position of literature? So this is the scheme of work designed by the ministry. This is from Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia, and this is a sample of secondary form 1. So based on the guideline, we can see that at the last part, 1 lesson, literature in action, we have only 60 minutes. That's the least. It is the same as writing. Some teachers will incorporate the literature into the writing lesson. And let's say this, literature in action, there are no specific materials in the textbook to support this lesson type. Therefore, teachers are encouraged to incorporate materials from the literature component textbooks provided by the Ministry of Education. At the same time, this is the most important, teachers are also encouraged to create their own lessons based on the themes and topics contained in the relevant textbook unit, or by using other possible resources. So as we can see here, it is not a mandatory for the teachers to teach literature, especially from the textbook. So teachers can find their own resources, materials outside. And because of that, some teachers are not willing to do that anymore. So they will incorporate literature in writing and speaking. And speaking is also related to literature because they have the storytelling part. They have to create a story. Okay, let's move on to the example of literature lesson from the scheme of work. This is lesson 5. What I want to highlight here is about this, learning outline. Teachers to refer to the suggested lesson plan on the following page. I love everything about our scheme of work from KPM because everything is there. When you click the second page, not the second page, the next page, you will see this. There is a pre-lesson, there is a lesson delivery, and post-lesson. So actually, teachers don't need to think much. You just have to follow whatever that have been designed by the KPM. So teachers are actually opt to amend the suggested activities. It is not necessarily that teachers have to follow whatever written on the scheme of work. This is only guidelines and reference. If let's say you don't have ideas to do, you don't have much time to think about the next activity, then you can refer to the suggested lesson here. Okay, next, let's go to the next lesson for literature. Okay, look at the learning outline, the second paragraph. Alternatively, teachers may develop their own lesson based on the themes or topics contained in Unit 1 of the textbook using other possible resources. This shows that our curriculum now about literature is very lenient. Teachers can choose whatever they want. So instead of using literary texts, teachers now can let them to produce their own. Just now, Cikgu Zarina has talked about this, about the teachers have to find for the suitable literary text for the students. But now, because we want them to produce, we want them to improve their skills, writing and speaking. So instead of that, instead of as a teacher, we ask them to produce their own story. Next, this is another topic for today, teaching English literature in fun and engaging ways in current challenges, especially to tackle Gen Z. Some of these ways that I will suggest is from my own opinions. Some teachers may have different opinions lah. Okay, this is how to tackle Gen Z. Okay, as a teacher, we can provide topics or materials they are familiar with. As far as we concerned, in school, we are using English textbook that come from English country, isn't it? And it is undeniably not easy for the students to understand the culture. It is not easy for the teachers ourselves to explain their lifestyle because we need lots of research to understand and then to tell the students about it. Okay, next, second, encourage them to suggest and decide. This is what I have done with my students. I let them tell what motivates them the most. What activities do they want throughout the lesson? Because only they know what they want, only they know what they know. But don't make them to decide everything. You are the leader. You are gathering information from the students. And then number 3, encourage them to discover things. Okay, this one, teacher can assign the students to find materials. Don't do spoon feeding because students nowadays are very tech savvy. They know what to do with the internet. They know what to do with their devices. So let them do whatever they have to do. And then number 4, integrate technology in teaching and learning. So we cannot deny they are more expert in this. Even Cikgu Zarina has mentioned about her students were helping her to suggest apps, to use apps. So let them use technology in their learning. And the last one, give the opportunity to experience. I can say that experience is the best teacher. To understand it is to feel it. I have lots of experience in IIUM where I had classes with Dr. Faiza in every semester within 4 years. I can still remember when Dr. Faiza has brought us to IIUM Lake, Tasik UIA itu, and asking us to produce a poem and then recite the poem there. That was so inspiring. I even brought this story during my interview with SPP. They also say that this is very inspiring as a teacher. Not English, as a language teacher in general, because we want that, what do we call that? How to say that in words? But the students loved those kind of activities. Okay, next, let's go to the next one. Okay, next we are talking about teaching English literature in fun and engaging ways, suggested activities. So these are the suggested activities that can be done in school. So number one is drama competition or role play. This can be referred to our literary text in textbook or non-textbook, means outside, materials from outside. So this is very common. A big event by English panel, we can do role play on the stage. We have one time in a year to do this. And because this activity is very good, I think, because as teachers, we can take them out of the class because kids love this activity, especially those naughty students. They love to go out of the classroom. They love to do activities that need movement. And in return, we as a teacher, we get their attention to engage to the learning. And because of this pandemic, however, I couldn't do this activity anymore. So what I did was this, role play in a classroom. Even in a classroom can be done as well. So the right side is my picture, were my students. They were demonstrating about how to cross the road. They were reading a text about safety, road safety. They were removed from removed classes, kelas peralihan. Okay, next activity that teachers can do is making a video. This one is quite new and quite hot option from the teachers. So we can do what? Write script. We can ask the students to write script, and then they can record the scene, and then they can edit video, and then they can publish product. Okay, as you can see, the first picture is taken from YouTube. Dear Mr. Kilmer, VZ Production. This is done by students themselves. They love doing this. And the second picture, I love the second picture. It is a poem, Nature Form 5 by Mardia. She uses her own painting to portray her interpretation. She reads the poem, and then she uses her own painting, and then she transfer those painting into video. So this is what we want. We want the students to express their imagination into what they want. We can do lots of things in many ways. For example, they can interpret their imagination into words, in essays, for example, that is typical. And then into pictures like this, or into lyrics or songs. They can make songs as well. Okay, next activity, watching a movie. Watching a movie, I have three ways that I have done to my student. Number one is watch and talk about it. This is what happened. I let the students to watch the movie until the end, and they will talk about it. They discuss characters, plot, values, and so forth. But the bad thing for number one is those short attention span that has short attention span would feel so boring because they have to wait to watch approximately 1 hour to finish the story. Second is play, pause, and guess. This one is quite interesting because the students will be engaged to the learning. So we will play the video and then we pause for a while, for a few minutes later, and let the students guess what happened next. And then we play, then we will show them who is correct or who has the closest prediction of what happened next. Okay, and then the last one is continue a story. This is suitable for a short video. We can do this for a short video. I usually use this with the short animation because in a movie, some movies reveal characters later. We don't want the students to wait in a very long period of time. Okay, next we have useful expression. This is taken from textbook itself. Listen to sample audio, practice intonation, demonstrate, discuss, and compare. I usually do this in speaking lesson. I take this from textbook and let them to do role play. But the focus here is to let them to express the intonation. And this is online task during PDPR, Nearport, Palette, Woodwall. I know everyone knows this already. Woodwall, especially Woodwall, they like this because they love competition. They love competition so much. Okay, let's move on to the effects of technology on teaching literature to Gen Z, positive and negative. So the first one provides hands-on learning opportunities. This will develop the students' trust among the students as well as the students' trust towards the teacher. And then engages learning and enhance comprehension. With good graphics of technology, we know it helps a lot to retain more information. And then improve students' proficiency, especially when we provide them with audio. Audio is the best grade, not best and great help for the students, especially for listening and speaking. They can learn the pronunciation and so forth. Number 4, instill values and leadership skill, in which they can learn script writing, they can learn editing if they are making a video just now. And the last one, helps in language acquisition, choice of words. This helps in vocabulary. And we have negative effects, consumes long period to complete a product. For example, if they are to produce a script, they have to write the script, and then they have to proofread the script, and then after that they have to edit the script. Then they can start recording video. And then technology disparity, resources. Not all schools have complete working set of devices. Some students share devices with parents. This is very saddening to some of the students because we want the class to be fun. We want the lesson to be fun, but we have to think about other students too. And then disconnects from real world. This is about last facing time. And the last one is plagiarism issues, because some students might copy and paste whatever they see on Google. All right. Okay, before we end the session, okay, this is other resources for literature, for teaching literature. This is actually taken from scheme of work. Everything is there. Everything is in the scheme of work. Teachers should not be worried. So these are the suggested resources. The websites are there, 3 websites. All right, thank you very much. Sharp 9:45. All right, thank you very much. Oh, before that, I would like to thank Dr. Faiza and the team for inviting me to this webinar. Tadi saya lupa nak sebut. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Nur Naziha. Thank you so much for the detailed and instructive explanation on teaching literature in the current context in Malaysian classroom right now, right? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end, but not yet. All right, this is the moment you guys are all waiting for, the Q&A session, and we have received one question, and we are hoping to get more questions. But let us get through the questions first. Okay, so there's a question from Sister Ila Malik. Okay, she asked, if learning literature has been removed from the curriculum today, is there any possibility that it will resume in the future, or maybe after the pandemic? So either speaker 1, 2, or 3, or maybe Madam Naziha or Madam Zarina or Dr. Hazika, if you would like to answer this question, please.
Well, I think it's a very good question, but as I'm not in the Ministry of Education, I'm in the KPM is different from KPT, Kementerian Pelajaran Tinggi, the higher education. So this, I mean, the curriculum, the policies and everything falls under the KPM, the Ministry of Education. So I mean, Ministry of Higher Education, but I might not be able to provide the precise answer for that. Perhaps Madam Zarina is more suitable to answer this. But well, I think they have a team, a policy makers, if I'm not mistaken, right, Miss Zarina, and they decide for, because it's a top-down system. So I believe these are not for us to answer, but rather the policymakers and the current Ministry of Education at the moment. So perhaps I leave this to Madam Zarina, inshallah.
Okay, let me try to answer this question. Okay, so I'm not the decision maker in KPM. In fact, I'm not even in KPM. We just follow the curriculum the KPM has given us. But I think, in my personal opinion, you won't see literature anytime soon, because we have just switched from is it KSSM to the new CEFR. Okay, so to the new CEFR. So basically, if you're not familiar with CEFR, it's a Central European Framework of Reference for Languages, and this is a standard that's being used in Europe and for assessing languages. Okay, for assessing languages. So the shift is, we want to use English. We want to assess English the standardized international way. So if you take any language assessment test, okay, there's no literature element at all, because the focus is assessing your language skills. So that's reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So I think Malaysia is trying to make that shift. Okay, trying to make that shift. So instead of maintaining our status as English as a second language, when the fact is, most of our students are at a level where they're not exactly a second language level. So that's why the shift is on CEFR, to assess students' language. so that they can make that shift easily when they move on to university where you have muet, or if they're lucky, they can take standardized international exam, like TOEFL or IELTS very easily, because that is how language is assessed. They assess speaking, listening, reading, writing. So there's no element of literature at all. So basically the KPM is trying to train our students to be assessed that way. So literature is basically out for now. I don't know if it's making a return in the future. I don't know. Hopefully. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Hazika and also Madam Zarina, for highlighting on why it might not be used or resumed in the future, right? Yes, we're not KPM. We don't know the real thing, but we can see the possibility there because we are using Saffler now. So let's get to the other questions. So we have few other questions here. Okay, the second one is from Sister Nurul Faika, and she's asking, it's challenging for students and teachers to discover the topics of Western cultures and celebrations. Why is it embedded in textbook previously and still there? What is the relevance? I mean, like we're looking at Paul's textbook right now, right? So speakers, you can answer this question, either one of you. It's already challenging to understand the topic of Western cultures and celebration. Why is it still embedded in the textbook? Maybe opinion. I mean, like we're not the policymakers like Dr. Hazika said, but at least maybe an opinion from someone who has the knowledge in this background. Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, like what have been mentioned by Madam Zarina, our English education system, we tend to follow the standard English assessment, the Quinn's English approach of learning, pronunciation. Our English system is based on the standard English from the Britain. I mean, we follow the British system. So perhaps that's why in most cases that we found parts of the Western culture embedded in the learning, in the textbook or in the literature part of the curriculum. I've read papers disagreeing with this this approach, but again, perhaps there are pros and cons. It gets you closer to the target language, but at the same time, it might not be relatable to your students, especially those come from rural areas. What I can say is that perhaps they wanted the student to be able to get I'm not sure, perhaps first-hand experience with the cultures of the target language, perhaps. Wallahu alam.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hazika. Any other opinions from Madam Zarina or Madam Nur Naziha?
All right. So I think okay, when you learn languages, I think language and culture is inseparable in my opinion. So if you were to learn another language like German, so there has to be some sort of element of culture in there, because that's just a function of language. It connects you to people who speaks that language. Okay, so language and culture is inseparable. I think in Malaysia we tend to focus too much on why are we learning this culture, because it's not really relevant to us and so on. But I think if we open our minds and try to look at how other cultures, I think it would enrich our experience. It opens our minds, and it makes us more open-minded as individuals. I mean, we don't have to become like one of those people. We don't have to celebrate Halloween just because it's highlighted in the textbook. It's just a window to their culture. And I think if you are interested in their culture, then you'll probably interested to learn the language as well. But like I said, the perception in Malaysia is that where should we learn other people's culture? We should be more part of our own culture. Yes, but I'm also saying that we should open our minds, and in this globalized world, the world feels much smaller. So I think there's no harm in learning other people's culture. But you don't have to be that to be in that culture. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I don't deny that a lot of our current textbook is very, very British. I mean, I had to learn when I did IELTS, everything was very British or Australian, but it's just it's just how we learn. It's just how we learn the language. I mean, if you want to be competent, we have to learn. We have to learn their materials so that we can feel as competent as them. That's my experience.
Right, right. Any add-ons from Madam Nur Naziha, maybe from your side, or? Okay, all right. Okay, right. So, Madam Zarina, I actually agree with you. Just to add a little bit, like for example, if you don't learn English language, if you're interested in learning Korean language, you're gonna be immersed in wanting to know about the Korean culture. So I think it's similar to that. So whatever language that you're learning, like Madam Zarina highlighted, it is embedded with the culture as well. So I think that's why it's still there in the textbook, and it is relevant actually. But it is up to us teachers to make it suitable for the context that we are teaching, right? So let's look at the other questions. We have one question from Khadija. Okay, she said, Assalamualaikum. What Gen Z wants to achieve, and how a student can learn from, how students can learn more about literature? Is there some movies about literature that you can use to enhance your knowledge? So she wants to ask a suggestion of maybe some literature movies to enhance the students' knowledge about to learn to understand more about literature. So suggestions from each speakers, different suggestion would be better. How can students learn more about literature? Is there maybe a movies about a literature context that you can enhance your knowledge? So yeah.
Meaning understanding the literature subject per se?
And I think it's in general, the understanding of literature in general, but using movies to enhance their knowledge, maybe.
I haven't, I am not sure, to be honest, but perhaps if you Google in YouTube or in any search platform, I think you might find lectures, movies. I'm not sure, but lectures, perhaps you can. It's quite a lot in the out there.
Right. How about maybe Dr. Hazika, maybe you have a favorite piece of literature that you actually use when and then you share it with your students?
It depends on the topic. So, like what mentioned by Sister Madam Nur Naziha just now, it depends on the students. It can be if the students like the classics, so you can use that. There's no point in what I like. It's for me, at least for me, it's what the students like, what the I personally, I did like what has been said by Sister Mr. Naziha just now. I allow the students to choose. I allow the students to tell me what they want in the classroom, what text that they want to incorporate. If I ask for example, I will ask them to look for it, to show examples. If they are doing assignments, I don't restrict. Personally, because I want them to be able to relate to what they're doing. I want to give them the freedom that the literature promise, or that literature, the benefits that the literature has. One of it is to give them the freedom, to allow them to feel that the purpose, the sense of purpose of doing what they are doing. So yeah, in most of the time, I will rather than I choose for my students, I ask them to look for what they like and what piece of literature that they want to recite. I want them to I ask them to explain, because well, you need to understand that my students are adult learners. So compared to Madam Zarina and Madam Nur Naziha, they have teenagers as their students. So it is not practical, perhaps, to ask them to use the methods that I'm doing now. Maybe to a certain extent, yes, but perhaps they might have different answers. But for me, I give 90% freedom to my students to elaborate, to express, to recite, to bring the materials into the classroom. So yeah.
Right. Dr. Hazika, thank you so much for that elaboration.
But one personal point. If I am to incorporate examples of poems or literature, or movies, it should be something general, something not general. I mean, something that is very popular so that everyone can relate. Well, you have different preferences, can so I'll tend to find movies that like what we call that. Box office movies like Harry Potter. It's kind of childish, but you can learn a lot from that movie, and it is. I mean, I would say like most of them is are aware of that kind of movies or stories. If it is romantics, it depends what is in trend. What is in trend now? I mean, if for romance or for any genres. So yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hazika. Sister Khadija, I hope Dr. Hazika has already answered your question and you'll be able to use her suggestion. Right. So we have one last question from Sister Hazira Aris. Okay. She's asking, when we assign tasks that require students to post or share their products via social media, as mentioned by Madam Zarina, some of them tend to be reluctant, which I kind of understand because their social media is meant to be for friends, leisure, and not learning, their privacy, right? What are the suggestions or methods, or maybe alternative, would you suggest in terms of differentiating our instructions or leaving the students with more than one method of task submission? Speakers. Maybe Madam Zarina or Madam Nurun Naziha?
Okay, in my opinion, those reluctant students are, most of the times, those reluctant students are coming from the weak students. The advanced students are very eager to post their products. So what alternative that we can do as teachers, we can group them into groups. Don't let them do those tasks individually, because it will intimidate, it will, affect them into the feelings, emotions, affect their emotions. So in order for us to actually encourage them to do the work and to post, to share the product via social media, it has to be in groups. That is my opinion. And I have done that before, and that works for me so far.
Right. Interesting. How about Madam Zarina? I'd like to hear a little bit from you as well.
Okay, so when I mentioned social media earlier, it's the goal is twofold basically. So number one is it's a resource. It's a form of resource. Okay, because when I was learning literature, our form of resource was spark notes or anything on the internet. There was no social media back then. So now that there's social media and there's like a wealth of information in social media. So I think you can tap into that when you teach literature to students. Okay, just finding resources from social media. Okay, so that's one function of social media. Another function of social media is an outlet for expressing themselves. So if you were to give them a task for literature, you can ask them to post in social media. You don't have to do this, but normally what I would do if I were to do something like this, normally I would survey my students. I normally would have ideas, but before I execute my ideas, I would normally ask, a few trusted students like what they like or what they don't like and so on. So based on that information, that's when I decide what I should do. So basically, there are a few goals that I listed. Okay, so what I want the students to do, like for example, I think what was the last project I did? I think, okay, like for example, uh, one of the Form 5 poems last year was What Happened to Lulu. Okay, so if you learn what happened to Lulu, or if you have taught that before, there are so many things that you can take from that poem and make it into activities. Okay, like for example, you can create like a missing girl poster if you decide to do that. You can also get the students to write the note, what Lulu wrote to mother that the mother just threw in the fire. Okay, so I mean those are the two popular activities that we did back then. So okay, so if we want to do that, okay, so if I wanted to do one of that, for example, I wanted my students to produce a missing girl poster. So before I decide which medium to use, I would always survey my students. Okay, let me just ask a few students what they like, or what they do in visit time. Does everyone have a computer at home? Is it convenient for them or not? So based on that information, that's I decide on what's best. Okay, so normally I would have goals. Okay, so I want my students to produce this poster. So the poster must have this, and so on. But the medium is what I decide is best for my students. If all of them have the conveniences to create a poster online, okay, that's what I will tell them to do. But if I find that majority of my students do not have gadgets, or it's very difficult for them to do that, that's fine. So I will just tell the whole class, if you can just draw a poster on paper, I'm happy, because at the end of the day, the goal is for me to see whether the students get the ideas from the poem or not. That's one thing that I think I like to keep in mind. So I think the last question was leaving the students with more than one task of submission. No, I will not do that, because that will give me headache of marking. Okay, I don't want to mark on paper and then on laptop lah. No, I would not do that. That's just headache. If one class, maybe it's manageable, but imagine if you teach 3-4 classes, that's not practical at all. So yeah, so before I decide which medium or platform, I would just normally read my students which is the best method ke apa ke, and then always stick to my goal. What is it that I want the students to do actually? So yeah, that's my answer.
Right. Thank you so much, Madam Zarina. That's very good. We should jot down. I think most of you have already jot down the tips, right? So that we can use it later on when we teach, or when you're teaching now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, speakers, and everyone that's here, thank you so much for being so patient with us today, and especially me when I keep on reminding on the time, especially to the speakers. I apologize on our team behalf, and of course for the inconvenience that's from our side. So before that, let me just remind everyone, for all participants, we would want to ask you to spend a little bit of time to fill in a feedback form that we have shared in the chat box. And then that is it. I am very happy that we have already reached to the end, and thank you so much, speakers, for the answers, and also for this sharing session that was very informative, and I hope it would benefit everyone who have joined us here. With that, Myra, are you there? Myra?
I'm here, NJ. I'm here.
All right.
All right.
I pass the floor to Myra.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Now we have come to the end of the session. We are very grateful to have such enthusiastic audience with us, and hope that everyone managed to gain some beneficial insight and knowledge tonight. We would like to thank Nunha for sponsoring today's webinar and enabling us to gift our speakers their new released 2022 planners as token of appreciation. Thank you, Nunha. As for our wonderful participants, e-certificates will be emailed to you soon. Please allow 1 to 2 weeks waiting time. And if there is any issue that requires further notice, don't hesitate to contact our team members, Anis and Nazura, via the Telegram group or their emails provided in the chat box. Okay, yes, also don't forget to fill in the feedback forms. All right, everyone, for memory's sake, let's have a quick photography session. Please turn on your camera.
Okay, everyone, on the count of 3, we will take our picture. So do pose as you like. You can pose cutely or anything. Okay, so in the count of, wait, there's someone. Let's wait for, done. Let me just do this first. So is everyone ready? Shall we take the pictures? Is that okay? Okay, so in the count of 1, pose. Okay, pose, hold your poses because it's a screenshot, not this. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's all. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Allahu Akbar. It's been a pleasure to be here with all of you, and we hope that this webinar will benefit you in every way possible. Similarly, we apologize for any shortcomings, and do know that we are rooting for your future teaching endeavors. With that, thank you, everyone. May we have another opportunity to meet again in the future. Stay healthy and happy. Take care, Daniel. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you so much, everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Stay safe.
Thank you so much. Ma'asalama.
Ma'asalama. Pamitis. Bye-bye. Kita boleh